Hello, this is Sam Gerrans from samgerrans.com. Today's Friday, March the 10th, 2023, and today the topic is the myths of the modern world. And one of the reasons why I decided to attack this particular topic is because I was scanning the comments on my YouTube, and I do scan the comments, I just don't answer them. So I answer comments on my Substack, but I do scan them and stuff, and I still have to deal with, trolls and stuff like this. But somebody had come on and disagreed, or thought they were disagreeing with me on something that I was talking about when I was addressing the differences between Russia and the West. And she, I think, is a she. If you're not, I'm sorry if I misunderstood. Is from Bangladesh, and she had some criticisms that she was making about Russia and their influence in Bangladesh. I have to admit, I'm ignorant on this subject, but it made me think perhaps I'm not communicating effectively, or perhaps they hadn't picked this up. I'm not here to sell Russia or to say that Russia is this wonderful place. That's not my argument at all. I happen to be here. And what it is that Russia is, it's on exactly the same trajectory as everywhere else, and it's using the same basic mythology as everywhere else. It's just further down the conveyor belt. And so it gives us a way of measuring how things are going. It's certainly not the case that I'm here saying that everything in Russia is wonderful, and actually it's not exactly the opposite. But part of what I'm trying to do in this project is to explain that, or rather to present an alternative point of view to much of the commentariat that I personally see, which holds to the view that the rules-based order of America is evil and bad. It talks about democracy, it talks about this, it talks about that, but actually just bombs everywhere that disagrees with it. And therefore, the so-called fair world order, as spearheaded by Russia and China, is this wonderful alternative. And they seem to me to be very uncritical of this. And my argument is not that this is bad and that is good, quite the opposite. Rather, that they're both on the same basic, they're operating according to the same mythologies, and therefore we need to be very aware of that. My own personal view is that this is unstoppable, and I talk about Jacques Ellul, or Jacques Ellul if you just say it in English, his books, two books particularly, one on technique and the other on a related topic, which is propaganda, which is an absolutely intrinsic and necessary part of technique. Now, his books are quite difficult to read, but I have read them and made quite a lot of notes. And so I thought, you know what, I'll just jump in and do this now. Now, what I want to do is, and I have mentioned this before, but I'm going to read this bit again. This is from his book, Propaganda. Here it is. I hope it will focus properly. So it's Jacques Ellul's book, Propaganda, the Formation of Men's Attitudes. And on page 39, he summarizes what the modern mythos is. And my point is that everywhere believes this. Everywhere which submits to technique follows this basic mythology, and it is a mythology. And just to summarize what I mean by technique, I think in French it's called la technique, but in English it's called the technological society. When he's talking about technique, what he's talking about is the abandonment of all traditional and religious notions in favor of technique. Now, what is technique? Is it technology? Well, technology is one manifestation of technique, but it isn't the only manifestation. Another technique would be, for example, another manifestation of technique would be modern management mythologies about efficiency and so on. And so everything becomes is made to submit to the idea that the only things worth having are efficient, rational outcomes. So, for example, a car which goes at 20 miles an hour and uses so much petrol is better than a car that can only go at 10 miles an hour and uses more petrol, let's say, for example. But the question of whether cars are necessary or not, or are actually an improvement in life, is never addressed. It's just more is better. if you want to get into this, and this is, somehow, difficult reading, but I do recommend it very much, is René Guénon, move that over here, The Crisis of the Modern World. He was a very brilliant man. I'm very impressed by him. And he's got a follow-up book, if you can find it, you probably can still, The Reign of Quantity and the Signs of the Times. This is slow reading. This isn't easy reading. It'll take you a while to read these, but it'll give you, if you are interested, a better idea of what I'm really talking about. Now, today I'm just going to give you a snippet, and I think it will give a better idea, a better sense of what it is I'm actually trying to address in this project. Now, this is from page 39 of Propaganda. And Ilul says here at the bottom of page 39, it seems to us there are four great collective sociological presuppositions in the modern world. Now, by the modern world, we mean the whole world now. Now, there may be a few little enclaves here and there, in the Amazon rainforest or wherever it is. But basically, the whole world is on the same trajectory. Russia is on exactly the same trajectory. China is most definitely on the same trajectory as the West, because they are all beholden to technique of adopting rational, pragmatic efficiencies, no matter what the cost to traditional religious sensibilities. Everywhere does it, okay? And although Ilul does not quite say it, the truth of the matter is that every society that does not embrace technique will be destroyed by those which do embrace technique. And those which do embrace technique will be destroyed by it. This is fundamental. Now, when he's talking about the modern world, what he's talking about is every society which has embraced technique, which is everywhere now. Even the countries which are further behind. And this is why I use Russia as an example, because Russia is further down to some extent. Maybe not militarily, maybe not in some certain ways, but it's a little bit behind the spearhead of technique, which is the West and all of its depravities. And in fact, when you think about it, the depravities of the West are themselves an expression of technique. And I use Russia to compare, not because Russia is intrinsically morally better, because it isn't, but because it being, a few steps behind in certain areas, we are able to compare. But given enough time, is every country which embraces technique going to end up being morally better than any other country? I would argue no. So this is really the kind of the nub of the thing I want to get to. And so when I read her comment, if it is a her, I hope it is, I'm sorry if you're not, I thought they got a really good point. I'm going to hit this point the next time around. So here we are. It seems to us that there are four great collective sociological presuppositions in the modern world. Now, this man was a political scientist, and he writes in a very exact way. And I'll just kind of try to break this down a little bit. I'm just looking for water, but I haven't got any here. What he really means is there are four great ideas or myths. Presupposition is something which you assume to be true and probably don't really ever visit, consciously in the modern world. By this we mean not only the Western world, but all the world that shares a modern technology. And I haven't read this in the French, but I'm sure he means technique in the sense that I've just explained it. And is structured into nations, including the communist world, though not yet the African or Asian worlds. That was true when he was writing this. I think it was about 1964, something like that, 1965. Still the Cold War and so on. So all this is old in these terms. It's old as concerns, certainly, Asia is very advanced in technique. Africa too is coming on board with technique. Everywhere is. Communism doesn't really exist in the classical sense of communism. We're obviously living through a form of Marxism. I would argue this is Marxism 2.0, which is again another form of technique, but it's not the Marxism which we all grew to know and love so greatly before, which was just the workers of the world unite. Now it's solipsistic, lazy, entitled ignoramuses of the world unite. That's identity politics. This is a new form of Marxism which is being used to destroy things. I'm not arguing against it. I'm just explaining. I'm just trying to sort of give an overview of the nature of the disease. in my view, my own personal view, technique is damned to lead man to Armageddon. There's no way out of it. It's built into the DNA of what technique is. Okay. In short, there are 4 basic ideas which everybody believes, and that's what Ilol is talking about. Anyone who lives in a society which is an expression of technique, which is anywhere where anybody's watching this, because if you weren't living in a society which was dominated by technique, or at least on a pathway in the direction in which technique leads, you wouldn't have access to the internet. So these common presuppositions of bourgeois and proletarian, we'll just leave that to one side. Basically, everybody who exists now. By bourgeois and proletarian, if you read Guénon, he will explain that these are actually involutions. These are the original caste system where there were superior and inferior beings in terms of not perhaps intrinsic value, but in terms of their position in the society. For example, one knew one's place, one's betters. There were people who were objectively understood to be superior to one by virtue of their position in society. What happens under technique is that's all broken down, and you're actually collapsing down to the lowest common denominator, which is why we have democracy. Anyway, I'm sure people won't like this, but I'm telling you what he says, okay? So what we're really getting down to are the common presuppositions, the common myths, the common ideas, the religion, if you want to call it that everybody believes. It doesn't matter what they say they believe, it's what they actually believe. And this, he's going to get to it. And there are 4 of them. The first is that man's aim in life is happiness. Everybody believes this. Doesn't matter where you go. If you talk to any Russian, they'll tell you that probably, actually, maybe not all Russians, but a lot of Russians would go along with this, especially they're not exactly woke, because we're further down the conveyor belts. Now, we do have wokeness here. It's sort of beginning. The first shoots of it are sort of pushing their way up on the forest floor, but it's not the collapsing lunacy that you have in the West, but it's beginning here. Okay, but the idea that man's aim in life is happiness, I hear this all the time, especially amongst women who have been infected with this here, I'm talking about in Russia, with this idea of, you'll hear it, the universe is working to give me everything that I want. You hear this all the time. In the West, it's a disease, but here it's beginning, and it comes through the reading of books which tell people basically that they deserve to be happy. This entitlement philosophy is attached to this. It's not only that the aim of every man or woman is happiness, but if you take it further, is that that's what you deserve, and if you're not getting it, somehow life is shortchanging you. So that's one thing. This is one of the myths, the foundational myths, which attach to technique. So that's the first one. The second one is, that man is naturally good. Again, this is attached to the idea of entitlement. I deserve it. You hear women use this, especially in the West, almost all the time. They deserve this, they deserve that, they deserve the other. No, there's no question of earning anything or having proven anything. It's just that you intrinsically deserve it. So man is naturally good. Ergo, he deserves everything that he wants. Okay? The third is that history develops in endless progress. So this is intrinsic to evolution, for example, or the Marxist ideas, that we are, and we have it, this idea of progress. And because technique appears to provide us with some semblance of progress. So, for example, an iPhone 10 is better than an iPhone 1 or whatever it is. We assume, because we have this technological confirmation of the assertions of the myths of of modernity. We see it sort of proven because the last car was not as good as the next car. Let's say, for example, we think that we are progressing, but are we really? Well, we are in a sort of technological sense. We are in a technique sense. Technique is getting better and better at producing things which are incremental or even maybe large step improvements on the last thing. But this only affects the realm of technique. It doesn't affect the human soul. It just affects this. But everyone believes that we are progressing. They talk about progress as though it was an unalloyed good and everybody believes in it. Most people never really question it. And the last was, and that everything is matter, i.e. a belief in a mechanical universe, that you can break the universe down, or individual people down, or all organic life down, and eventually you're going to get to a sort of mechanism. Man is a machine, the creation is a machine, and if you can understand, if you can kind of reverse engineer the machine, you can affect the actual essence. This is what transhumanism believes. It believes it. It believes that he can somehow reverse engineer things sufficiently to get to this, as it were, the DNA. I don't like that word because I don't actually believe that DNA is as important as people say it is. But let's just leave it there. And that eventually you can get down to the mechanical machine code, if you like, of existence, and that's what everything ultimately is, that there's a mechanical answer to consciousness. This is why people think that in 20 years they're going to be able to back up their spirit to a hard drive and then just import themselves into a newly created mechanical body. This is a religion. It's an absolute cult. Okay, that was the point I want to make. Everywhere believes this, and Russia believes it too. It's on exactly the same trajectory as everywhere else, as I'm sure all the African countries are, and Vietnam and Mongolia. They may be on different parts of this pathway, but everywhere is on them. Now that was I wanted to just summarize this in order to address this point, because I'm not saying that Russia is better. I'm saying that everywhere is on the technique roller coaster, and there's no way off it. None. Now, before I close this, I want to just compare this with what our forebears believed, because these four things: man's aim in life is happiness, man is naturally good, history develops in endless progress, and everything is matter. These four things we accept. I mean, I don't accept them. I'm sure some people who listen to my channel don't accept them, but most people do. And this belief is embedded in the waft and web of their entire mind. If you question any of this, they think you're completely insane. But I just want to say, maybe we are insane, who knows? But the point I want to make is, historically, over millennia, over the 6,000 years up until about the time of the so-called, erroneously called Enlightenment, men did not believe this. In fact, they believed the opposite. And this is what I want to get to. So let's start with, I'm going to quote some scriptures from the Quran and from the Bible, and then a few other bits and pieces, just to demonstrate that this isn't how people saw the world. It just wasn't. But we accept it now, and this is the new universal religion. And it doesn't matter where you live, because everybody believes it everywhere. Okay, so the first one, I've got a few notes on my screen here. Man's aim in life is happiness. Well, if we take the Quran, it says at Surah 2, verse 21, O mankind, serve your Lord who created you and those before you, that you might be in prudent fear. So that is the actual object of your createdness, is that you might serve your Lord and be in prudent fear. That was why you were created, according to this scripture. And if we take the Bible, excuse me, it says at Deuteronomy 6:5, and thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, and with all thy might, and with all thy soul, and with all thy might. That's a commandment. So our aim in life was not to be happy. It doesn't say that. You can't find that in the Quran, that thou shalt be happy, or in the Bible. It doesn't exist. It's not there. And men understood this. They understood their lives in these terms for 6,000 years of world history. I mean, obviously the Quran was written 1400 years ago and the Bible was written, in various stages over the last couple of thousand years. But even so, if you go back to the Vedas and so on, I mean, if you know the Vedas well, please correct me if I'm wrong. But if you can find an authentic Vedic scripture wherein happiness is accepted as the purpose of life, please tell me below, because I'd be very interested, but I bet it doesn't exist. So the idea that man's aim in life is happiness is a very recent idea. It's a very recent idea. It's an erroneous idea. We are actually built to be proven by the hardships of this life. Hardships and unhappiness is a part of life. Certainly happiness comes along, but it's really a side effect of efforts. And this is why conservative people tend to be happier, in fact they are happier, it's objectively the case, than liberals and what I call rather sort of disparagingly libtards, is because we take responsibility, firstly, and secondly, we see our lives in terms of a struggle of some kind in which effort is required. And so actual happiness is a byproduct of effort. And I'll get into that when I summarize Kaczynski's thoughts about the power principle, which is something which conservative-minded people, I'm not talking about how you vote, I'm talking about whether you take responsibility, we experience because we set ourselves achievable goals and make efforts to achieve them, whereas liberals do not, and there are reasons why they don't, but I'm not going to get into that now. So the second idea, which is the second pillar, if you want to call it, of the modern religion, is that man is naturally good. Well, is man naturally good? Not in my experience. Anyway, who cares about my experience? Let's just quote something from the Bible. Behold, I was shapen in iniquity, and in sin did my mother conceive me. Psalms 51:5. So that's nothing about being naturally good. Quite the reverse is true. Okay? And if we take the Quran, it says, hast thou then considered him who takes as his God his vain desires? God has sent him astray according to knowledge, and sealed his hearing and his heart, and set over his sight a covering. Then who will guide him after God? Will you then not take heed? That's 45:23. So according to the Quran, if God doesn't guide you, you're not naturally good. You're going to be misguided. You're going to go off the path and you're going to fail. So I'm trying to say here is that the view which we're told and we accept, people generally accept, and they accept it as axiomatically true. And by that, what I mean is they proceed as if it were true, but they've never actually questioned the premises. This view is very new and it's everywhere. The third point, that history develops in endless progress. Well, according to the Vedic tradition, for example, the inverse of this is true. We began, however many millennia ago, in a golden age where men were closer to God and life was far better and purer and more natural. And we've been going through a process. I mean, these processes are also, there are cycles within cycles, but the major cycle is of involution. It's of a degrading process, starting from the golden age, going through these various other ages to the fourth age, which we're in now, which is the Kali Yuga, which is the dark age. We are actually, according to the Vedic scriptures, living precisely in the darkest, most evil, and least progressive, if you want to use that word, time that's ever existed. So I'm just trying to point out to you that this religion, which is absolutely accepted everywhere and is an intrinsic part of technique, and technique is the philosophy which drives this whole world society, is upside down compared to what most men believed over almost all of world history. And if you want to find out more about that, I recommend the books that I held up from Guénon, The Reign of Quantity and the Signs of the Times, and the other one is The Crisis of the Modern World. And if you want to get one of those, I would get this one, The Crisis, or The Crisis of the Modern World. It's thinner and it's easier, but it's still a tough read. So you have to accept that that's the kind of read it is. This isn't a meme. It isn't a 5-minute video. It's something that's going to test you, and read it slowly because it's worth it. The third point is that everything is matter. As I said, this mechanistic idea of the universe. Let's just look at Genesis. It says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And then we read at John 4:24, God is spirit. Okay, just going back. So God created everything. So ultimately, everything must be spirit. And those who worship him must worship in spirit and in truth. In the Quran, we read at 29:44, God created the heavens and the earth in truth. That is a proof for the believers. And at 24:35, we read, God is the light of the heavens and the earth. So the creator of all things is the light of the heavens and the earth, and God created these things, and they came from nothing. God created everything from nothing. So there is no mechanistic explanation in either the Quran or in the Bible or in the biblical scriptures, Hebrew scriptures or Christian scriptures, which supports this idea. Now, whether or not you accept the Bible or the Quran isn't really what I'm kind of holding up for debate. I'm trying to demonstrate that these scriptures, which were followed over altogether over millennia, guided men's minds, and they operated accordingly. And so the idea that everything is matter, which we are trained to accept, it's in everything, that more is better. That's what it basically boils down to, and that everything can be understood in terms of its mechanistic qualities, which is intrinsic to technique, is a very new idea. So, in closing, technique is only about quantity. It's about measuring amounts. It's not about quality, and this is why we are given to assume that everybody is equal. Because if you're just an atom, then all atoms fundamentally are equal. But that wasn't what the ancients believed. They believed that there were superior and inferior men. They just did. I have to say that if you look at the Vedic idea of caste, it isn't so much that the Brahmins are better than the Kshatriyas or whatever it is. It's more that it is possible to become who you were meant to be, to realize yourself according to Maslow's hierarchy of needs within your own caste. But today, everybody wants to be everything, but you can't be everything. You see, not everybody can be. We're not equal. We are different. We actually are. We have different qualities in the same way as a swan has one set of qualities and a pigeon has another set of qualities. If a pigeon were to pretend to be a swan or vice versa, it would be ridiculous. And that's really where we are now. So in this system, it's only about measuring amounts. It's never about dealing with actual qualities, which is why they want to get rid of qualities as sort of as a measure of value. It's only about quantity, whether it's GDP, money, time, space, atoms, electrons, whatever it is. It's never about quality, except in terms of efficiencies, by which they mean measuring GDP, money, time, space, atoms, electrons, and so on. Okay, it's in everything. The other thing about technique, unlike the spiritually minded man in the past, certainly in medieval Christendom or in the Islamic world pre-technique or in the Vedic world or whatever it is that today they have no answers for the big questions. None. Absolutely none. Now, previously, science, this which is the kind of central thing that people talk about, what, don't you believe in science, bro? Or whatever. And science is supposed to be a methodology, as though the people of the past, the men of the past, didn't do science. Well, they did do science. They did all kinds of science. But interestingly, as you'll find out if you read, I think it's Gerrans, or I've read so much now, it gets a bit confused. They invented things all the time. For example, the ancient Greeks would come up with something new, which they would decide not to use. They would decide not to use it. Why? Because morally, it was not acceptable to the gods. They understood that this invention, which they'd just come up with, had a moral payload, and therefore they did not advance it. They chose not to advance certain things. Where is that today? There is no moral imperative except to advance technique as quickly and as fast and as ubiquitously as possible. Okay, it's never questioned that this thing might not be a good idea. So let's take, for example, Steve Jobs has come up with the iPhone. They would, let's say, think, now, is this a good thing? Do we want our daughters looking at this on spending all day on Instagram? No, that's probably not a good idea. I mean, there'd be quite a lot of beard stroking and thinking about it, and they decide, you know what, this invention, we're not going to use it. But today, the idea of not rolling out an invention across the entire world as quickly and as efficiently as possible wouldn't enter anybody's mind. So previously, science was understood in terms of the big questions. That a man's duty was to God, and therefore these inventions might not be a good idea. Look at Aquinas or Socrates, for example. But now science, in inverted commas, simply ignores the big questions or has stories which claim to explain these big questions, but they cannot prove those stories on the basis of their own methodology. And if you ask them to, then they do exactly the same things that everybody does within technique, is they then blame you and attack you and call you names. And that's what they've got. You're a Luddite, or you're non-scientific, or you're, I don't know what they'll call you something. They have a name to call it because they can't actually answer it. Whereas within, say, for example, the Islamic tradition, scientific inquiry was a function of religious duty, rather than being in some ways in opposition with it or opposition to it. Just to circle back to the comment which has kind of spurred me to make this video right now. All countries are on the same trajectory, Russia included, absolutely everywhere. I'm sure Bangladesh is on it as well. There's no off-ramp from this ideology. And as I go back and I say, every country or every society which chooses to embrace technique will lose its religion, its culture, its history, its family, its cohesion, because that's what technique requires. It is an atomizing process, and every country which refuses to do it, excuse me, will be destroyed by those which do, and every country which does embrace it will be destroyed by it itself. So every problem which technique claims to solve simply creates a whole new set of problems, which it then claims technique will solve. So every problem which technique creates, the idea is, going back to the progress idea, that eventually there will be a new invention which will solve that problem. But that new invention itself creates a whole new set of problems, which it doesn't solve. It's like a gambler who keeps doubling down on a losing hand. So this, in essence, is really part of what I'm going to be talking about, or wish to talk about. And I wanted to make this video now before I forget, because I thought the point that this person was making was interesting and correct. And that's part of what I'm going to be talking about, or am talking about in this stage of my project. So that's that. In closing, I currently upload to Odyssey, Rumble, YouTube, and Substack. So please like, share, and subscribe on all platforms. It's free to do, but a valuable way of giving back. Go to samgerrans.com and drop your email in the box to subscribe to my Substack newsletter and get all content delivered to your inbox. I back up my mailing list so that when big tech cancels me on one platform, we still have options. I work outside the mainstream and have no corporate sponsorship. If you value what I do, you can help keep the lights on at samgerrans.com/contribute. Or upgrade to a paid subscription on my Substack to access my more detailed work as well as comment. Substack being where I read all feedback. I continue to make my legacy projects available free. Summaries and links are at samgerrans.com/books. Finally, I post news, thoughts, and announcements to my Telegram channel at t.me/samgerrans. Thanks for listening, and bye for now.